All right, well, welcome to the Volunteer Reception Center training. My name is Kathy Zolke, and I am the Office and Resource Manager here at Marshfield Area United Way.
And I'm Jody Friday, Community Impact and Volunteer Center Director for the United Way of Southwood and Adams County. Read our screen here. So what is a volunteer reception center? You'll see a link here on the slide to a YouTube video that shows a comical look at what a volunteer reception center is. We encourage you to take a look to see briefly how a VRC might operate. But a volunteer reception center is a critical component to a spontaneous volunteer workforce in an emergency response and recovery. The VRC's purpose is to turn a crowd of spontaneous volunteers into a screened and organized workforce assigned to specific volunteer jobs. The VRC's function is to inform potential volunteers of the risks and requirements of the volunteer job. They also provide safety training and other basic training that volunteers might need. The VRC completes volunteer applications, recording important information, and the VRC records who is where and when. The VRC is flexible. It mobilizes quickly if needed and expands and contracts as the situation evolves. One of the most important functions of the VRC is that it holds volunteers at bay, processing them one at a time and matching their skills with the best job for their skills. It keeps chaos from happening.
So where can a VRC be? It can be under an awning in a field, depending on what the job scope is. An example would be if there was a missing person, it will most likely be set up near where the search area is. And ideally, it should be anywhere with a defined area, and it should have parking, power, restrooms, a place for volunteers to wait and process, place to prepare food for the VRC volunteers, and phones. Typically not in public schools, since that is where shelters would be set up. Another example is Hurricane Sandy. The VRC was ran up with a school bus, kind of showing how flexible a VRC can really be. For Central Wisconsin, some ideal locations would be town halls or the courthouse.
The Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, and Incident Command, the IC, interface with the Volunteer Reception Center, the VRC. Lots of acronyms there for you. All directions such as activation, the location of the VRC, the hours and time frame which it operates, approved volunteer roles, exceptions, paperwork requirements, background check requirements, minimum age for volunteers, specialty training, more come from the EOC. And in our case, that would be Wood County Emergency Management. No independent decision-making occurs in the VRC regarding volunteer guidelines. Page 3 of your manual highlights decisions that are made at the EOC and the IC level before the Volunteer Reception Center is activated. Any exceptions to rules are made by the EOC and the IC. All public messaging comes from the Public Information Officer. No members of the VRC shall communicate with the media, and the media is not allowed into the VRC.
So motivations of volunteers and common misconceptions. Most volunteers are there to help. However, there may be some there to gain personal advantage, but this is why there is a process in place. You do not have to assign every volunteer to a job. If something seems off about the volunteer, then you can excuse them. Volunteers are only called upon if they are needed. So an example of this would be Hurricane Katrina. There was an abundance of volunteers and no organization, which caused complete chaos. There were sex offenders working with children, and that's why the screening process is so important.
One of the first jobs you have as a VRC volunteer is to set up the Volunteer Reception Center. There are Go Kits, which are housed at both United Way offices, which have a diagram of how to set up the VRC. There are other diagrams available in your VRC manual. Setup will be somewhat dependent on where the VRC is located. Things that may impact a volunteer response to a situation: what media coverage is the disaster getting? Early in the response, the word is just getting out and volunteers will begin to go where directed. Later in the response, media is spreading the word, maybe many more volunteers will show up. Weather also plays a role in how many volunteers will show up. If it's a bad weather day, less volunteers will come. And the day of the week, weekend versus weekday. If it's a weekend, more volunteers will come. How many VRC staff are available impacts setup as well. If fewer VRC staff are available, cover all critical jobs and control the flow of volunteers. As more VRC staff are available, assign trained staff to keep the overall amount of time for processing a spontaneous volunteer to a minimum and move more people through quickly.
So this is what a basic VRC setup would look like. The arrows represent the areas that the volunteers would then move through.
There are 3 different kinds of volunteer reception centers. The basic VRC, you will be likely you're working VRC to start out with, and the layout as the starting point to start with, and then move to the expanded VRC. There are 7 staff needed to operate a basic VRC. 1 director, 1 greeter/registration coordinator, 1 interviewer, 1 phone bank operator, 1 assignment coordinator, 1 trainer, and 1 liaison to the EOC. As the VRC can expand, you start adding multiple staff to certain functions, but you also add supervisory levels and runners and new functions like the supply room or a break room. An expanded VRC may have anywhere from 7 to 50 volunteers. In addition to the director, you might have something like an assistant director. Maybe you have 1 greeter, but multiple registration coordinators, a traffic controller, interviewers. You may have multiple of these, multiple runners, multiple phone bank operators, assignment coordinators. You may add a data entry coordinator and a credentialing team, and then also a staff break room volunteer. The rapid response VRC is discussed a little further into this presentation.
It's very important to not open the doors until all stations are set up and ready for movement and processing volunteers. If there's a large crowd waiting, go out there and make announcements from time to time and thank them for coming and to assure them that the VRC will be open as soon as possible. However, we need to make sure to take the time to adequately train staff before the doors open. It is also important to ensure that all staff members know exactly what is expected of them. After the doors are open, ensure everyone takes breaks.
There are VRC job descriptions and grab and go binders, like we said, at both offices here on the north and south end of the county. These are some of the jobs that are included in there. They're also given specific details in your VRC binder, but each Go kit has them as well. And we'll quickly go through what job duties are for each of these different positions.
Yes, the VRC director, they oversee the staff, operations, record keeping, reporting, and the physical safety of the VRC. The VRC director also coordinates with the EOC communications and handles difficult volunteer communication.
The VRC greeter or registration coordinator manages traffic flow into the VRC with a friendly but firm demeanor. They greet and thank volunteers. They control the number entering the building. They direct volunteers to the registration area. If media arrives, they direct them to the EOC. And if donations arrive, they direct them to the designated area.
The VRC traffic controller greet and direct volunteers to the appropriate areas and maintain safety and orderliness. There may be more than 1 traffic controller, and then they are going to be located at the center of the VRC.
There's not a specific bin for the traffic controller, but there is an envelope for them or a folder, and that is located in the director's Go kit. The VRC interviewer conducts interviews with potential volunteers and assigns to specific jobs. They verify completeness and accuracy of forms. They use the interview form as a guide to inquire more about the volunteer's skills. They review health limitations, but the volunteer is not required to provide any health information. If there's any question about placing a volunteer, call over the VRC director. And excusing a volunteer is completely acceptable. If you're in doubt, you may think of having some alternatives, such as calling the volunteer back at a future time and telling them there's no assignment for them at this particular time. Assign them to the safest environment possible. You may like to place them in a job which has supervision or place them in a job that is not physically taxing. When the volunteer accepts an assignment, the interviewer completes a referral form.
The VRC liaison is responsible for the direct and accurate transmittal of information to and from the VRC to the EOC. So this information may include briefing updates, approval of volunteer jobs, guidelines and rules for volunteers in the VRC, volunteer exceptions, and expand, contract, or suspend the VRC as needed.
Again, there's no Go kit for the liaison to the EOC, their folder is in the director's Go Kit. And same with the runner, no particular Go Kit for the runner, but there are folders for them in the director's kit. The runner's job is to move between assigned areas with current information. A runner may be positioned to respond to interviews and post those volunteer assignments on the assignment wall. Another runner could collect volunteer application forms from the verification area and return them to the phone bank. And then another runner may move between the VRC director and the greeter and registration area.
VRC phone bank operator, they are responsible for the clear and accurate transmittal of information to and from agencies or sites requesting the volunteers. Calls to and from groups or places requesting volunteers, calls from people wanting to volunteer or donate certain items that are needed, call people back with reported special skills that are now needed. Operators will file and secure volunteer forms, complete individual cards on skills offered, and create callback plans for needed skills.
The VRC assignment coordinator works with the phone bank operator to organize volunteer jobs on the assignment wall. They collect requests for volunteer forms from the phone bank. They coordinate the volunteer needs, organizing them and writing them on poster sheet paper. They post assignment posters to the assignment wall. There is a sample of what this may look like in your Go Kit. And then they remove completed assignment posters from the assignment wall and return them to the phone bank operator.
The verification coordinator checks over all paperwork for completeness, gives wristbands to volunteers based on days and times of volunteer assignments, provide directions to assignment sites, and answer any questions the volunteers may have.
The VRC safety trainers provide safety and other training to volunteers. They train volunteers in small groups. They follow the training script exactly each and every time. They review the risks of the volunteer job, emphasizing the importance of following the supervisor's instructions at the work site. They ask if there are any questions, and then they sign the volunteer's form. All safety and training instructions will be provided by the EOC.
There are 4 areas that the volunteers have to move through. The first will be the registration area, which has the greeter, registration coordinator, and traffic controller. Next, they move to the interview area, where the interviewers and assignment coordinators are located. Then they will go to the safety trainers. Next, they will move to the volunteer verification area, where the verification staff is.
The registration area, which is on page 38 of your manual, volunteers are greeted and provided forms to fill out. A brief orientation may be given. They're asked to sign in, and their forms are quickly reviewed to be sure they are complete. Registration forms are initialed by registration area, and any special skills will be flagged on the form. Volunteers wait in the registration area until an interview spot opens up. This is also the spot where any VRC staff sign in and sign out.
As interviewers are available, the traffic controller directs new volunteers from the registration area to be seated with the interviewer. The interviewer reviews the application and liability waiver forms with the volunteer. The interviewer initials the registration form if it is complete, and at the completion of a satisfactory interview, the volunteer is given a referral form explaining their volunteer job description and the location, date, and time of the assignment. The volunteer then proceeds to the training area. If not a satisfactory interview, the interview keeps the form, signals for help, and the individual is then escorted out of the center.
The safety training area information from the EOC will let the safety trainers know how to proceed and what needs to be taught. The safety trainer will document the attendance of each volunteer on their registration form and on a sign-in form. The trainer follows a checklist and presents point-by-point prepared safety briefings appropriate to the specific emergency event. The trainer reviews the risks of the jobs volunteers will be doing. The trainer initials the registration form that the volunteer did receive training, and then the volunteer moves on to the verification area.
The verification staff verifies the completeness of the registration form and initialing. The volunteer application forms are sent to the phone bank by a runner and returned to the verification area once credentialing is complete. The verification staff provides a completed wristband that correlates to each date and time of the volunteer's assignment. Volunteers may receive more than one wristband based on the number of assignments that they're going to be given. The wristband is color-coded and has volunteer names, dates, and times in which the volunteer expects to work and is attached to the volunteer's wrist. The volunteer verification staff provides directions to the volunteer assignment location, and answers any questions about the location, driving, parking, or time of arrival, and the things that would need to bring with. The volunteer leaves the registration form with the volunteer verification staff.
Now a little bit more on the rapid response. The rapid response VRC is intended to move huge numbers of volunteers through a short process and quickly into the job assignment. This is on page 99 and 100 of your manual. There is one key volunteer assignment, and the EOC will provide mass transportation to and from the work site. Possible scenarios may be likely in Wood County would be a missing persons search.
So there are no shortcuts with the rapid response. All steps are still completed, but they're just compressed. Time is saved since there's only one job to do. Either volunteers meet the criteria or they don't. Pre-screening, registration, and waiver forms, verification of ID are all done in the waiting area. Health-related questions are done with small groups, and volunteers can determine if they meet the criteria. If there's a volunteer that there is a doubt can fulfill the task that didn't self-eliminate, they would move to a private area for then further questioning. The interview is shortened since you are not asking about other skills. You are verifying the information on the form and getting the background check done. Basic safety is provided at the VRC. Job-specific safety will be provided in transit.
There are many forms that are used in the VRC. All forms are included in your Go kits. But just to highlight a few, the emergency volunteer registration form, be sure that the reverse side is signed and initialed at each station on this form. Requests for volunteers form are taken at the phone bank. Jobs are recorded on this form, but they're not posted until approved by incident command. Emergency response volunteer referral form is used to give job assignments to the volunteer. One form is sent with the volunteer and one is posted to the assignment wall. The safety trainer attendance record must be signed by the volunteer and by the safety trainer for liability purposes. There's also the VRC staff sign in and sign out and an expenses incurred form.
So thank you all so much for attending or viewing our safety training.